Ask the Podcast Coach for March 6, 2021.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music that means, hey, it's Saturday. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com, and joining me right over there, I always do that backwards, is the one and only Jim Cullison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. We have a little bit of spring fever here in Omaha, Nebraska this morning. I don't know about you guys, but weather's turning. This is fake, by the way, for everyone in the United States. Not real spring. Winter is still.
It's still going to come back and smack you in the head. Yeah, that's the for me. In Ohio, we always think spring is here, and then there's always one thing where you kind of get smacked in the head, and it's just So, but Jim, are you thirsty this morning?
I'm super thirsty. What do we got?
It is about that time. And of course, that coffee pour is brought to you by the one and only Mark over at podcastbranding.co. And for weeks, we've been telling you about how great Mark is, the fact that he's a podcaster and he's this awesome graphic artist, and he'll make a PDF for you. He'll make artwork. He'll make a logo. He'll make a whole full-blown website for you. But wait, there's more. What if you go, I don't know, this whole branding thing, it's new to me. What does it really mean? I'm not really much of a marketing person. That's right. Mark now offers an audit. If you want Mark to come in, look over your website, look over your artwork, everything that makes up your brand. I want to say it was something like a 40-point checklist of things. That I could be wrong, but I remember my notes are somewhere on my desk here. But the beautiful thing is, here is Mark, who has years of experience in marketing, in branding, and he can go over all of your stuff again to make sure. And then it might be, hey, you know what, this... you've got too many fonts going on here, or maybe your color palette is a little wacky or things like that. And you don't know because, well, that's not your zone of genius, as they say. Go over and check out Mark at podcastbranding.co. And to all our friends that have joined via Clubhouse, if you want to raise your hand, the way this works, we will bring you on stage one at a time if you raise your hand. Of course, if you're watching live on YouTube, askthepodcastcoach.com/join. And Jim, that is a mighty fine mug that you are sipping out of.
Isn't it nice? Yeah, the guys over at the James over at Dog Podcast Network. Why am I struggling to say that at this point? dogpodcastnetwork.com. And if you're a dog enthusiast, a dog walker, we joke you could even have a cat if you want to walk it. Dog Edition, they're kind of their flagship podcast. They're looking for folks to hire over there, as well as I think they're giving some stuff away. So yeah, if you haven't checked it out yet, we're just a couple weeks away from maybe a new mug, but Dog Podcast Network. Oh,
and speaking of that, that's right. Look what came to my post office box.
I like it. Good job, James.
I found this something this week, and that is when you have a post office box that is handled by UPS, you can have it set up to where they will email you when something shows up. If you have a post office box fueled by the lovely United States Postal Service, they don't. And so I was like, man, it's kind of weird. I mean, I don't get a lot of stuff at my P.O. box, but, every 2 months something will show up. And so I went over there, and there was the mug from James. If you're from Florida and you sent me a bottle of something, I need to know what it is, because I'm not drinking it until it's either olive oil or homemade wine, but there was no note, just somebody's last name and their address. They're from Florida. And I was like, well, this is lovely. I don't know. Am I supposed to pour this in my, is this, I don't know, but it was very, but they sent it way back in January. It's been sitting there for 2 months.
Sounds a little sketchy, Dave. I don't know.
Well, that's it. I'm like, I generally do not eat food from people that I don't know. So that was
the Postal Service, U.S. Postal Service, has the ability, you can sign up through their app, and every piece of mail that goes through gets scanned. And my wife just showed this to me yesterday. You can, on a daily basis, you can check and see what's coming from them. Like if you're waiting for a letter or whatever, you can log in and see on there where that's coming from and what's going to be delivered that day. I had no idea it was that high tech. So same thing there. Sign up on their app. I think you have to put your address in and verify it or something like that. And then you can check every day and see what kind of pictures you're getting or what kind of mail you're getting there.
And the one thing I did want to bring up here at the top is I see this question a lot. I always go out in the morning and look for questions. And again, if you're on Clubhouse and want to raise your hand, if you have a question, we'll bring you up on stage. If you're watching on YouTube, just go to askthepodcastcoach.com/live if you want to ask your question via chat. Or if you want to actually jump into the show, just go to askthepodcastcoach.com/join. And people always say, how do I get to be a guest on other podcasts? And so I just wrote these out. Number one, all good podcasting starts with this. Know who your target audience is. Find shows that target audience would listen to. Please listen to the show and see if they actually have guests. I know, Jim, you've had people send you guest requests on shows that you don't have guests on. Contact the host and ask if they actually are taking guest pitches. And then if they say yes, and here's the key, don't tell them how great you are. Tell them how much you're going to benefit their audience, because I don't really care that you invented sliced bread and blah, blah, blah. I want to know what you do with that. And then what I've been asking people to do is if somebody actually fits, if they've done that, I will say, can you send me a link to an interview you were on before so I can hear what you sound like? Because I did some interviews this week, and one guy was in literally a glass box, and I was like, ugh. So had I known that, I would have said no. And then if you want to, and if you have, numbers, you could say, oh, by the way, I have, 800 Twitter followers. I have 2,000 Instagram, blah, blah, blah. But you'll hear it in a couple weeks on the School of Podcasting. I interviewed somebody who does podcast booking, and she said, maybe what you should be looking at, instead of who has the biggest audience, blah, 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 look at it as, who do I want to start a relationship with? She goes, because that's really the power of being a guest on somebody's show, is when you start to develop a relationship with that podcaster. In theory, it's not just like, hey, thanks so much for letting me get in front of your audience. I'll see you later. And I was like, that's a really good point. So if that's something you're thinking about, now the problem is that takes time. And that's why people then tend to revert to spray and pray, which drives me crazy. So, but the other thing I know we can talk about today is, Jim, you've been playing with a new toy. Supercast.
Yeah, Supercast. So I had a listener actually reach out to me and say, "Hey, would you put your feed on Supercast?" My first thought was, "Oh my God, another place, another place to do this." And so eventually I was like, "Okay, I'll give it a try." So I headed over there, and it's actually a super easy. We did some. With the listener, I did some cost analysis. So, okay, let's just first explain what Supercast is. Yeah. Basically, Supercast is a Patreon competitor in some ways, right? So you can put your feeds there. The model is a little bit different. I think it depends on the fee that you're getting. I think
it's like 59 cents per user, and then of course everybody's going to charge that 3% fee because they're getting charged that 3% fee.
Right.
But
so a little bit of a different. Sorry, I wasn't ready. Hold up. But I'll talk from just experience. So 59 cents basically. So for like a $3 minimum at 59 cents, you kind of think, well, that's not. I think at Patreon I can get that a little bit cheaper, but then as Patreon goes up, I think it gets more expensive at Patreon. Not that it's that much of a difference. I wasn't really kind of doing it on price. They've got a fairly nice feature. Then when you go to sign up on your podcast app, you subscribe. It gives you a separate feed, and then you put that in your podcast app or whatever, however you want to subscribe to it. And really slick, worked fairly easy. It was a great way to do it. So I think one of the things I'd encourage folks is, if you need an alternative to Patreon for whatever reason, if Patreon's not working for you, you don't want to use Patreon, that kind of thing. Patreon has certainly gotten complicated. Supercast was actually really easy. I created a Square account, attached the Square account to it, got it set up, dumped in my feed. It imported everything. There's a section there where you're like, hey, do you want to import your current feed? Yeah, I'll bring it in. It doesn't they don't host the files. They just they just host where they're located, right? So they take your RSS feed when you do that. So, Dave, pretty easy setup. I had it set up in 20 minutes, maybe 25 minutes. Very similar to Patreon in the sense that you can set up these different subscription levels. So I set a $3 minimum level. By the way, $3 is the minimum. No $1. No, there's no $1 things there. So 3 is the minimum. I set a $5 level for my little coin thing that we give away. Kind of mimicked what it was on Patreon, and then let it fly. And the user loved it. He's like, yeah, that was super easy. When are you going to put your video feeds out there? I don't think I'm going to put my video feeds out there. Not right now. So Supercast.
The other advantage is you can see how many downloads an episode got. And I would assume that's coming to Patreon, because didn't they get purchased by Acast or something? I know there's an Acast connection there, and Acast is a media host. And what I do, because I use Supercast for the School of Podcasting, and I just went to them and I said, hey, I've got X amount of members. I want to create, an individual feed for each one of those people, and I don't want to charge them for it. I want you to charge me. So we worked out a deal where every month they see how many subscribers I have, and then I get, again, whatever it is, 59 cents or something like that, plus the 3%, blah, blah, blah. But I'm not charging them. That's the thing. I might actually be paying more than 59 cents, because if they make any kind of profit on that 3%, I know some people will work with Visa. They're like, hey, we're bringing you so many customers. We want to take of that. We want a piece of that 3%. So a couple questions in the chat room. And again, if you're listening on Clubhouse, you can just raise your hand and we'll bring you up on stage. But Elena,
Dave, hold on, before we shift, let's just take a look at it. I did bring up the page.
Nice.
Yeah, if you want to take a look at what you get, this is just Home Gadget Geeks. This is the basic landing page, so I didn't change anything to it. So this is what someone would hit when they land there. I've got the plans that they can select. They can sign up now. You can just become a supporter or get the coin available. How to get started and subscribe. They have an FAQ. Dave, drop dead simple. Like, my fear is, like with everything, that they're going to make this more complicated. Eventually, and you can see here, I'm in the dashboard, and this is the one subscriber I'd come in. I haven't even advertised it yet. But so you get a dashboard, and like you were saying, you get some stats, episode downloads, revenue in there. So yeah, I just hope that I hope they don't make it too complicated. Yeah.
It also works with Zapier. So what I love is when somebody signs up at Thinkific, which is what I'm using currently for the School of Podcasting, it automatically pops them into Supercast, and then I use SendFox for my email, so it automatically pops them into that. I love Zapier. That's a great tool. But yeah, it's really cool. And then it's also easy because if for some reason, in my case, like in Jim's case, if they cancel their subscription, it just automatically turns off their feed. But for me, I can easily, when I get a notification that somebody's graduated from the School of Podcasting, I can go in and turn off their Supercast feed. But yeah, it's one of those where, for me, the one thing that Patreon does that this one doesn't, and I don't really, it's not that I discourage it, but nobody does it. On Patreon, you make a post. Like it's like a membership site. And if other members wanted to comment on that post, they could. And I don't know that happens in Supercast, because they're just getting a feed, and it's kind of unique to each person. That way you can turn it off. But I don't see a lot of that happening, at least for me, on either of my Patreon things. People use it for the feed.
Let me think through this for a second. So, because I haven't really thought through it, I don't have. If I wanted to create a private feed with this, right? I would create. What would I do to create? I wouldn't want to give them my public open feed, right? Because that's available everywhere else anyway. So I would create a second feed of some sort that's secret, that I haven't put out in public, and then I would give Supercast my private feed. Is that right? Am I thinking?
Well, for me, I just go in. Like I just had, every Friday we have lunch with Dave. It's about a half hour of just group coaching, and I just go in. It's like they're my media host. I make an episode, I put in my show notes, I upload the media, and when I hit publish, it goes out to.
So they do host.
They do host.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
That's where they get the stats from. So
got it.
But that's why I also don't think they'll do video.
I think they were doing I thought they were doing a pass through, but then collecting the stats there. Okay.
No.
Well, yeah. Good.
So
Good to know.
Daniel says, we're talking about spray and pray. That's where people just send a generic email to you and they're like, hey, love your show. Here's why I'm so great. Have me on your podcast. And I'm like, and Daniel says, actually, spray and pray is what happens during potty training.
It does.
But Ross says, do you recommend having multiple places where people can contribute or get paid, or just focus on one? I would tend to say one, but I know Jen Briney over at Congressional Dish. Now she just has a donation model. Like she has a Patreon, but if you want to donate, like a one-time donate, she has, like, you can donate Bitcoin to Jen if you want. She's like, here's my Vimeo link, here's my PayPal, here's my Bitcoin. Like, if you want to give me money, I will take it in any form you want. So, but that's a good question.
Don't donate Bitcoin, people. Don't do it.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Because it makes you kind of go, well, should we start a supercast for this, or should we just keep the pay? The thing you have to keep in mind now is, for me, just maintaining who is active and who isn't, who gets added to the page, who doesn't, things like that, is a little bit of work. And if you add a second one, now you've got a second place, especially if you're doing things like giveaways and sending emails about special event, you've got two places to go now. And to me, that sounds like a headache.
Well, and we do special things for our Patreon subscribers. And, then do you now say Patreon and Supercast? And do you mix the two? And do you, it does add an element of complexity, and you can't forget about one. Like, if you start another one, you got to make sure you're tending to it, that they have special things over there as well.
Yeah, it's one of those things. And then somebody's going to ask you, well, which one should I sign up for? And you kind of go, whichever one you want to, because some people already have a Patreon account and it's super easy to add another one. And then, so it's kind of like, be sure to add that question to your frequently asked questions page, because that's going to come about.
I think if you got a lot of feedback, like, okay, let's just say, for example, Patreon does something really stupid, and they have. They've done a couple things really stupid in the last couple years. So they get really dumb, and you get a bunch of supporters who say, hey, I want a different way to do this. I don't want to support Patreon anymore. Well, then I think you change. I think you change when you need to. I mean, I announced this week that we have the Supercast feed. If folks want to try it, I don't think I'm going to have a rush of people heading over to Supercast to try it out, because just one person asked. But I felt like, if
one asked, there's more.
Yeah. Well, and I thought, well, okay, this would be a good experiment for Ask the Podcast Coach. So, the setup experience, setting up a Square account, getting the Square account set up and working, you sign up for a free Square. That was super easy. I don't know what the backside of this is like, as far as like reporting goes and taxes. That'll come up next year. But have you used it through a year? So have you gotten tax reporting?
I just started it because I used to put the recordings, because all those are recorded on Zoom, and I would put them in Facebook, and it just dawned on me that listening to a 90-minute Q&A on Facebook is painful.
Yeah.
Right. Nobody's doing that. And I was like, I need a way to get this content to people. And so I know Glenn is saying it's hard enough keeping up with just one, let alone two different planes. But yeah, if somebody said right now, would you use Patreon or Supercast? I like Supercast. And like you said, it's a simple interface. I've got decent reporting in there that you don't get. And it just seemed a little easier. And I love the fact that with Patreon, you can enable the RSS feed, but now you've got to teach your audience how to copy that RSS feed and paste it into their favorite app. With Supercast, it's a little bit like the love feature in My Podcast Reviews, where you click a link and it kind of figures out what app is on your phone and then says, hey, which one do you want to use? Same thing with Supercast. It basically, you click a link and it goes, okay, where am I going? And you go, well, I use Overcast, and it then just subscribes to your show and that. So it's pretty slick. The other thing we want to keep in mind, and this is where I love Jim's attitude of like, I'm going to try this. So many people think like, ooh, if I do this, manna from heaven will fall. And it's like, remember, you're going to get about 3% of your audience, maybe 5% if you're doing phenomenal. I know this show, I actually looked at it. I was getting 8%, and I was like, holy cow, that's amazing. And then I looked at my weight loss show, and I was getting like 0.2%. And I'm like, you put those together, guess what you get? Yeah, about 3%. So it's kind of interesting. And Daniel says, yeah, podcast addict link just added to love the podcast, but we're still looking on collecting those reviews. Very cool. Yeah, my podcast reviews just came out with more features. So if you want to check that out, schoolofpodcasting.com/MPR. I know I love the fact I have mine set up. I think it's on either Saturday or Sunday. It emails me weekly if I have any reviews, which is always fun because lately I'm just getting a lot of hate mail on the podcast rodeo show, which is always kind of fun.
Yeah, it's a show kind of designed to get some hate mail.
Yeah, it is. You're either
right?
going to love me
you
or hate me.
You kind of asked for it. You asked for it. Kim says she doesn't like Patreon, and that she would prefer just to give it to her directly.
Well, that's the thing. Kim, because we live in the same city, Kim has paid for her Patreon via check.
Mm-hmm.
And while I deeply appreciate that, there are times when Kim's like, I didn't get that email. And I'm like, oh, crap. Because Kim is now a second thing that I have to manage and remember to include her in all that stuff. So when you add a second thing, it's another thing where you're like, oh, wait, hold on. So it's fun that way.
Well, it's just like they're saying in chat. It's the balance is how many things do you have? How convenient can you make it for everyone? I think you want to make it as convenient as possible, but if you're a guy like me who struggles to keep up with all that stuff, you're going to have to set up some systems to make sure you're checking it on a regular basis, or that you're going in and doing the things that you need to do on those. Because so for in Kim's sake, I don't know, Kim, would you do it via PayPal? Like, is that something? Because I think they take some too when you do it that way.
Well, yeah, PayPal always has their 3%, whatever it is thing.
Yeah.
I think Kim was just being nice. She realized if she paid me with a check, it was like more money in my pocket.
Yeah, it's 100%, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not complaining.
Yeah.
At all. So, Kyle says the podcast rodeo show is the tough love your podcasting parents never gave you. In a way, I did have somebody do a podcast rodeo show, and I basically said, here's the thing, here's some things you could fix on your show. And his sister heard me and called him and it's like, there's some dude bashing your podcast and like, pitchforks and torches, and she was ready to go. And instead the guy's like, no, he's got a point. And he actually signed up for the School of Podcasting.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah. So, you never know, but, we actually have somebody raising their hand in Clubhouse. So that's awesome.
Bring him in.
That is, Mark is coming on up. Let me make sure the phone is up on that. So, and the way this works, of course, we're recording this and Mark knows that. So Mark, how are you? What's your question?
Well, I'm very well. Thank you, Dave. It's following on a similar theme that I've got a podcast that I'm trying to raise money for charity with. So I'm not looking to make money myself, but I'd like people to, if they enjoy the podcast, to make a donation to a charity. And I wondered, with your experiences, what you'd recommend.
Well, first things first, you have to ask for it. I know that sounds kind of silly, but I hear so many people that whatever their goal is, I want to sell more books. I want to get more bookings as a speaker. I want people to buy my membership site, and then they never ask people because they don't want to be salesy. So you got to be salesy. If you don't ask, you don't get. So that would be one. And the other thing is Jack from the Darknet Diaries, who gets 300,000 downloads an episode. His big thing was when he asked for something, he does it purposefully. He explains how they're going to benefit, and he does it slowly. Because so many times people go to do a pitch and they're like, hey, I set up this new thing. I'm going to try it. I don't know if it's any good. We'll see what happens. And if you want to, I don't know if you want to think, you could, yeah. And it's not like, hey, I want to, if you made it to the end of this show, obviously you get value in this. And if you'd like to help support this show, and we actually have a charity drive going on right now, and you can find it at this website, said very slowly and clearly.com. So you can hear. And again, that website was spoken very clearly and slowly.com. You can really help somebody right now. So you have to do a pitch. But I see so many times, I have people here on this show when I'm like, hey, tell us where we can find your podcast. What's your website? And they're like, oh, thanks so much. It's .com. And I'm like, there's no prize for saying your website the fastest here. So Jim, any advice on how do you get some donations?
Mark, are you thinking you're going to create a podcast just for this, or do you want to do an episode and an existing podcast for it?
No, it's existing. It's a short daily podcast that I've started with the idea of raising money for charity in the way that you might like run a marathon and raise money for charity. I thought I'd try this because it's something I enjoy doing.
Yeah.
And yeah,
The big thing you can do is reach out to the charity and say, hey, I'm helping to promote your message. How about you help promote mine? Because if they might be thinking about starting a podcast and you're like, hey, I've already started one. I'm promoting your charity this month. How about giving me a retweet or something to promote that? Lee Silverstein from the We Have Cancer podcast, when he first started his show, it was originally called the Colon Cancer Podcast. And his whole idea was, whose message can I help amplify? And he just then looked for a partner to for his podcast. So that might be something, since it sounds like you have your charity selected, see if they can, help promote it, because when they win, you win, everybody wins in that scenario.
Mark, are you thinking of like just trying to do one episode to promote it, or kind of a spot to promote it over the course of a bunch of different episodes?
yeah, it's ongoing, really.
Okay.
Yeah, and I really appreciate those bits of advice. They're fantastic.
Yeah.
And also was thinking, you talked about Patreon and Supercast and something like that. So I'm also thinking about what method would be the best to try and say, this is the place where I want you to donate.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
You need to check it locally, like the rules around this, because it's taking donations for a nonprofit, and then the tax status of it varies from location to location. So you'll probably need to do a little bit of local research to say, okay, if I'm taking in funds for this, how do I make sure I don't get taxed for these?
Yeah.
They don't come to me. Because if you set up a Patreon account, you'll have to set it up as you. And so you'll need to do a little bit of work to kind of like, and this is where you might want to contact the nonprofit to say, hey, do you already have an existing framework from which I can direct people to where they can give? You definitely do not want this coming in. Like if this thing is successful, you're going to pay the taxes if you're, well, depending on the location, right?
And you better than have records to show, okay, I received $100 donation. I then made $100 donation. So, so you can kind of see that the net income was zero, but you better have that,
And Mark,
tracked.
different locations have different rules about what you can do in media around these kinds of things. So just make sure you're not, you're not breaking any local laws by doing what you're doing to raise money for them. That just may be a good local check, just to kind of say, again, partnering with the nonprofit, they may know because they do this all the time. So what you can and can't say. I definitely think small bits over long periods of time, and get that information in your podcast up front. Don't save it to the end. A lot of folks never make it to the end. You want that right up front, and be bold about it. I mean, if you want to do this, don't hesitate. Dave and I do the promo bits right up front to get them out for our sponsors there.
Yeah.
So I totally lost that word. I have no idea where it went. It just totally disappeared. But Mark, I think those would be my recommendations, but definitely check the legal ramifications of this too, based on your location.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. And I really like your ideas about promotion and being bold and doing it up front. That's
right
great.
on.
Thank you, guys.
Right on.
Thank you.
You bet.
And
Dave, I love your point about being clear, by the way, on that. Like, I think some folks come at this sheepishly. They come at it a little, well, okay, if you want to, I guess just say it. Like, it's a spot. Just say it. Go ahead.
Well, the other thing too is people don't like to sell. And I always want to say, you don't like to sell if you're not confident in what you're selling.
Right.
But if I'm helping somebody, it's a little easier to talk about. Before we head over to our mid pour here, Carlos said, I want to start a solo podcast, but I find it hard to talk so long. This is an easy fix. Don't talk so long. And really, I mean, not being sarcastic here, but podcasts don't have to be 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 40 minutes. I used to listen to one. It's funny because it was a branding show. They did it every day. And the goal of this podcast was to get me to remember the Association of Christian Athletes. And that worked because I can remember that. I can't remember the name of the podcast, but it was 2 minutes. And so it's weird here again with a little planning. So what I do, and you don't have to do what I do, but I actually write up a blog post to flesh out what the heck am I going to say. Then I boil that down to bullet points. I turn on my microphone, and sitting right across from me is Ken Blanchard, is Kim Craggy, is Jim Collison, is somebody, and I'm talking to my buddy, and wait till you hear about this thing. This woman did the best answer ever on the benefits of podcasting. And I just talked to that one person. And it's weird because you realize you're like, but Dave, it's the wall. And if it's, and then if it takes 15 minutes to cover your topic, congratulations. Your podcast is 15 minutes. If it takes 7 or 8, I do a show called Your Podcast Consultant. And the idea is it's supposed to be less than 9 minutes. And now that I'm really boiling it down, most of those are about 4 or 5. And so I'm hitting one topic. I come in, I explain how you're going to benefit. Here's why you should do something. And, it doesn't have to be super long. So
we forgot to ask Mark. We forgot to ask Mark what his podcast was. Is he still out there?
He is still around. Yeah. Mark, if you want to
jump back in, we want to,
I'm going to pull him back up on invite to speak. Yep. There we go. I realized that when I hit the button, I was like, we never asked him for his website. Mark, what's your website? Or not?
Hello.
Hey, Mark. We forgot to ask you what your website is.
Yes. Thank you. The podcast is a daily podcast. It's called Destination Tokyo, and it talks to Olympians and Paralympians from GB who are aiming to be at the Olympics and Paralympics in Tokyo this summer. And the charity that I'm raising money for is called Maggie's Cancer Centres. My wife had bowel cancer last year, and they offer emotional and practical support. And they're two of my passions. And so thank you for asking.
Yeah, and check out the podcast We Have Cancer, because that's not just about the people that have cancer, but also the whole family and dealing with it. That's done by a good friend of mine, Lee Silverstein. So thanks again, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. He's out walking his dog. I hear
he is out walking the dog. And Jim, are you thirsty?
You're looking a little thirsty. That first 30 minutes just flew by, Dave.
Way fast. So, and that reminds me, I need to hit this button and that button. And we always thank, speaking of, Patreon and things like that. Yeah. We always take a second here to thank, first, we always thank, in this case, we call him the teacher's pet, if I can get my mouse to work. And that is, again, our good friends over at the Dog Podcast Network, where you can actually win $5,000 if you're a creator that happens to have a dog. They're looking for great stories. Oh, and by the way, it's about a dog. And like Jim mentioned, they have a great podcast over there called Dog Edition. If you're looking for something to listen to while you walk the dog, or if you're me, just walking around the block and you like dogs, you don't have to have a dog. You can definitely check that out over at dogpodcastnetwork.com. And they're looking for 101 dog stories. So if you got one, go over there, because I don't know about you, $5,000 in the bank would not be a bad thing. But we always thank our $20 supporters, people like Shane over at spybrary.com. So if you enjoy all things spies, check that out at spybrary.com. Ed Sullivan at soniccupcake.com. He's an audio editor. He will make you sound like butter in your ears. That is a weird way of saying that, but it'll be good. And he's a great guy. The Latin Podcast Awards. This is put on by Felix and is powered by the Audio Dice Network. So if you have a Latin podcast and want to get involved in that community, that's a good place to start over at LatinPodcastAwards.com. He was in the chat room earlier, Glenn the Geek Hebert over at HorseRadioNetwork.com. If you like horses, you'll love Glenn, and his Horses in the Morning show has like 8 million trillion episodes at this point. He's been doing a daily show forever. And it's a lot of fun. I actually tune in on Fridays because they have a thing where they read really bad ads where people are trying to sell a horse. It's like, hey, come buy Sparky. He doesn't bite that much. It's like, what? Max Trescott up in the air at aviationnewstalk.com. Greg over at debtshepherd.com, where he's teaching financial wellness. You can find him at debtshepherd.com. Kim Craggy, who's also in the chat room this morning. If you're looking to develop your voice or reduce your editing time or improve your content, well, you got to go to Toastmasters, and she's got Toastmasters101.net. the Indie Drop-In network at indiedropin.com. If you've got a true crime or a comedy or a spooky story, Greg actually will get your podcast in front of new listeners, which is kind of what we're looking for. And Michael Delaney over at Baby Mountain Radio Productions. Find him at babymountainradio.com, where podcasting and hard work are made fun. And if you'd like to be an awesome supporter or see our $10 supporters, they're on the page over there at askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. Or if you would like, speaking of one-time donations and things like that, you can go to askthepodcastcoach.com/store, where you can also buy my book, Profit from Your Podcast. And I got to say, I had a great way to start the morning. I don't know what happened, but this morning I started off with like 4 people that said, "Hey, I read your book. It's really good." One of those was the guy from Podpage. And he said, "I'm not saying this because it's an affiliate link." In fact, he purposely didn't use an affiliate link, which I thought was an interesting move. He's like, "This was actually down to earth, like real life, no hype, no BS kind of advice." So you can find that over again at askthepodcastcoach.com/store, or you can send us a one-time donation, send us a mug, whatever you want to do.
Glenn gave me a great idea for a segment on Home Gadget Geeks, and that's like tech scam of the week. Like,
Ooh.
that, he reads those silly ads,
Yeah.
but in my space that really wouldn't be there. But there's kind of a scam. You go on eBay and you see these 2 terabyte thumb drives for like, or on Amazon for like, $25, and you're like, okay, that's not even real. And there's whole sites, there's YouTube sites dedicated to this, but it'd be kind of fun to have a segment, scam of the week.
There was one I saw that I was this close to buying, and it was apparently refurbished electric guitars, and nice ones that are normally, at least $800, and they were all $100. Yeah. And I was like, you can't buy a Paul Reed Smith guitar for $100. I was like, either these are stolen or something, but
it's too good, right? Too good to be true. Yeah.
I see probably. You have a screen. Am I looking to share that?
Yeah. Well, do you want to switch topics real quick? Can I?
Sure.
Can I bring one up? So I had mentioned at the beginning of the year that this is the year I'm going to figure out what to switch my video cam to, right? My webcam. I'm on a C920. Today I'm on the iPhone. We talked about this last week. I'm using that Epoch. I forget the name of it already, but I'm using the I think it's called Cam Epoch to actually use my iPhone. I'm using the front facing camera on my iPhone. I have it in a Manfrotto clamp and a holder, so I'm using that. Struggling a little bit with the color, but we're working on it. But Dave, you bought something this week, and I've been looking at this, and you can show that the Sony A6000 that seems to be, or at least as I've talked to several folks, that seems to be a go-to camera for webcam replacement. It's also, I know a lot of vloggers have moved this way. They're moving to these kinds of cameras. So I was in a studio here. We have a podcast studio that's opened up over the last year or two here in Omaha. By the way, they just charge $30 an hour to come in person, which is super cool. So I'll get some more information on that here in a little bit. But so this is the one. When I asked him, he had 3 of these in their studio, and because they're doing video as well. I said, "What are you using?" He says, "We're using the 6000s." You had mentioned to me that you're trying one this week. What did you get, and how have you liked it so far?
Yeah, I just got it yesterday. It's a Sony VZ1, and it is basically, it's like $700, so it is not cheap. And what I liked about it is, number one, it's got a flip out screen, so I can, if I'm shooting myself, that comes in handy. And it's now on one hand, I can't switch out the lens. The lens I have is the lens I have. They do make, a company made a deal to make if you wanted kind of a wider view. But for me, it's designed for vloggers, bloggers, and people that are not looking to do, to me, I just want to make a talking head video for the School of Podcasting. And so I thought about it, and I was like, well, there's a really good chance in the future I'm going to go, I wish I would have got that other camera where I could swap out the lenses and do this, but it's also like twice as much. I didn't see the 6000, and this one also makes it super easy to turn that thing into a webcam if I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And I just started playing with it last night, so I didn't want to use it today. Although as I look at my image here and I'm somehow pasty and glowing, I was
You're
like,
not too bad today. I'm struggling. I feel like I'm a little brown. Just like it's a struggle. I'm using eyeglasses on the Mac to try to get the saturation and the tint and the contrast. It's a lot harder than you think. I'm not a video guy, so I don't really understand. I just move dials until it looks kind of right.
Yeah.
But
And I also found out that not everyone should be shot in 4K. That's when I
well,
looked at
that's
my
true.
phone, and I
That's
was
true.
like,
I'm a little worried about that. Like, I got some wrinkles and, you can't apply the zoom filters. Zoom's got those filters that'll make you look better, right? It'll smoothen your skin out for you and some of those kinds of things. That's crazy.
there's actually a filter on the camera if I wanted to, where I can have it smooth out my skin.
Kind of a beauty filter.
I was like, can it straighten my teeth? That would be great. If there's some sort of straighten your teeth filter, that would be awesome. But for me, I was looking for, and I kept trying to make my iPhone work like a DSLR, and I was like, you know what? Let's just buy a DSLR. It's the Sony VZ1. I put a link in the chat room there if you want to check it out. But I say this because I could have easily done what I'm going to do with the C920, which is $70. This is not, hey, everybody run out and buy a VZ1. This is something that, and there's no way to explain this besides the fact I just wanted my brand to have a little more polish, just a bit. And it's probably fueled by keeping up with the Joneses when I see other people doing this, which is, again, not a great idea when you compare yourself to others. But I was like, and then it was a matter of like, look, I got about $4,000 of stuff sitting in my closet that I'm not using. If I sell it, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be able to get $700 for this camera. So,
I think for you, Dave, it's a good investment. I mean,
Yeah.
I think having it doesn't hurt. And like I said, I have to make a decision whether I hadn't heard of this VZ1. I have to look at the 6000 series and see what people consider. But I don't think it's a bad idea. The drawback to having my iPhone up here, which it's got great and next week I'll turn it around and do the rear facing camera. But I guess this is I don't know, what's the front. The front's where you see things, right? The back is the back of the phone. So this is the front facing camera. So but I can't check Clubhouse. Like it's not like I have two iPhones. So,
Right.
I can't help you it's up there. I can't help you on Clubhouse. I can't do.
You've got to go find your old iPad or something.
You can't. I don't have one. I guess I could do that as well. But
here's an interesting thought. Anything before we move off the camera thing? We're going to put a pin in that. It's different attitudes, and there is no you do you. But it was interesting at Podfest yesterday. I worked Podfest all 2 weeks of it. I was working the Libsyn booth, and we ended up Rob Greenlee, who's really into Clubhouse, came in, and the topic was Clubhouse. And so we were talking about it and explaining kind of the pros and cons. And one person came in and said, how are you tracking your return on investment? Like, are you seeing your downloads go up? Are you doing this and doing that? And it was kind of interesting because that's not the attitude I see a lot of, at least, because if somebody's in there pitching, I'm not going to stay in that room. So I just said, that's, I understand that's what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what I'm using Clubhouse for. I'm coming over to build relationships and get my message in front of people that don't know me yet. And so, depending on what your goal is, you might use Clubhouse completely different than I do. For me, I still think a great idea is to maybe set up an after show. If you publish on Monday, say, hey, Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be in Clubhouse. See the link in the show notes because you can get a link. And just realize also, a study came out, 70% of the world is still on an Android phone, which means they're not coming to your Clubhouse meetup. There's a new one called Stereo that I was this close to signing up for, but they wanted access to my contacts again. I went, you know what, until, I'm not a tinfoil hat guy, but I was like, I think one app that has access to my contacts for no apparent reason is good enough at this point. And Pamela is raising her hand. So thank you, Pamela, Pamela, Chris. Oh, the one and only, another guy that's been podcasting for like forever, and is in the book, by the way. profit from your
I
podcast.
didn't know that.
You didn't know that? Yeah, Chris Christensen. Yeah, because this is a guy that has been doing the Amateur Traveler podcast forever. And if I remember right, you sell pictures from that you've taken while you're out and about. He's benefited all sorts of times. People, no. Maybe have you? I know you've gotten free trips where people.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, people
Yeah.
have said, "Hey, we would really love you to come to Zimbabwe or wherever, insert fake country here. Zimbabwe. It's home of
You got to be
Hanson.
suspicious though when you get the invitations to Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And if they're trying to, I've got a lot of money that I need to give to you.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. But Chris is now taken. No, you've won a podcast award, right? I know for a while.
No, because Lou Mongello, when there was a travel category, Lou would beat me every single year for whatever 10 years that they had that, and finally they decided that Lou was going to get an emeritus thing.
Yeah.
They weren't going to award it to him, and then they did away with the category.
Oh. Yeah.
So no, but I've won a awards in the travel space.
There
So
you
I've
go.
won a Society of American Travel Writers Award and a few National Association of Travel Journalists, North American Association of Travel Journalists Awards, and then was also named by Travel and Leisure Magazine in 2014 as the best independent travel journalist, and that's all based on the podcast.
There you go. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, what was your
I got invited to the White House and
wait?
got to be paparazzi for the Pope for a day.
Nice.
And the strangest thing about Amateur Traveler, if you go to get a job with the Thailand Foreign Ministry, you'll be required to listen to 2 episodes of the Amateur Traveler and graded on your English comprehension as part of the
Wow.
English comprehension exam.
Nice
So
to
yeah, it's
know.
been an interesting ride. Yeah, almost 16 years in July.
Holy moly.
But I didn't actually just come on to talk about
Right.
about that, but thank you. No, I was thinking you were talking about Clubhouse, and I was going back to the conversation about Patreon.
Mhm.
And I've been doing a Patreon now for just a year or two. Probably, I can't even remember if I started 2 years ago. Maybe I started during the pandemic. But I do, an early episode, an ad-free episode. If you do this amount, you get the mug. If you do this amount, you get the sticker or whatever. But the thing I think that most of the people who sign up for keep signed up for is that monthly Zoom call that we do.
Mm.
And so, that kind of feeds back to the Clubhouse conversation of, I think for them, the connection is more important. And the funny thing is, of course, that's the one that's the most fun for me. It's much more fun than doing another episode or, putting out an episode early or putting out additional episodes or all of that other stuff. I'm really enjoying the Zoom calls. And, at one point they were saying, well, are we going to keep doing this after the pandemic? Is this a pandemic thing? It's like, well, I'm going to keep doing it because I'm really having fun. And I've actually found some of the guests for the shows that we've done from some of the patrons as they start talking about their latest trip. It's like, oh, well, come on the show and let's talk about that. So it's been really, and as is not a surprise in podcasting, I think many of us find that when we meet people who are our audience, they're great because of course they like us, so we have things in common. And so it's not uncommon. I know that podcasters have such a great time when they meet their audience that spending time with your audience thing can be a blast. And I've done trips with them also. We'll do, not with the entire audience, obviously, but we'll do trips annually until COVID. And, at first that was scary. I'm going to spend a week or 10 days, out being myself, hopefully with all these people. And then those have also been just a blast.
Well, that's it. I did this recently where I just reached out to random people on my newsletter and said, I'd like to kind of do some basically market research. If you don't mind, let me pick your brain. And I got the woman that's on my show this week we just started talking about personal branding. And I was like, this should be an episode. And so, and there are people that actually go on trips with their audience. Glenn used to do a cruise, and he'd invite all the horse people together and they all get together and talk about horses and eat too much food and go to Cancun or wherever they go. I don't know, but you can do
I
that.
think the history of Rome, I think he's done tours even after he stopped producing regular episodes and went on to the Revolutions podcast. I think he's done some history of Rome tours still, because obviously he gets new listeners every day.
Yeah.
Because it's still a great podcast series, even though he hasn't done it for 5 years or something like that now.
That's it. And with Patreon, there are people that donate because they just want you to do your art, man. So they're true patrons. Then you have people who want more episodes. So that's where the bonus people come into play. And then there are people that just want to get closer to you. And that's where the things like Zoom meetings, or in some cases I saw where some people, they actually allowed you to shape the show. Like they would have like a quarterly meeting and throw out ideas for the show. And if you're at a certain Patreon level, you could help pick the topics that were going to be covered in the future, which is great because it's coming from your audience. So that's great. So
Chris, how many do you have when you do your Zoom calls? How many show up for it?
Well, I'm trying to think of how many I have in Patreon right now. Total. I mean, it's not a quit the day job kind of money right now. So it's 30, 40, 50, somewhere in that range.
Sure.
But we probably get a dozen people who show up, I would say, for the Zoom calls.
Yeah. How do you structure those calls? Is it a structured call in a sense, or is it just a free for all?
No, it tends to be a free for all. In terms of, I don't often come in with, sometimes I've got questions that I really want to get some feedback on, like Dave was saying. I mean, it's a great opportunity for that. One time I remember coming on and saying, okay, I think I actually gave them access, not just early access, but access to a show that I wasn't sure about. It's like, do you think that I should put this show out? I think it's a little weak. Give me your feedback. Am I being overly harsh? And they said, no, you're right. Don't put that one out. But other times it's just, hey, has anybody been out of the house, been able to travel at all here?
Yeah.
That's kind of what a lot of them have been like this last year, or what plans do you have when things open up or whatever. But, it's a bunch of people who love travel. So it always, goes into travel in some fashion. And of course, this year, hey, what have you heard about vaccines and all sorts of other things? Because that's what we're all talking about everywhere.
That conversation, that open conversation, just scares me to death. By the way, I mean, I just don't like thinking of having 30 friends on Zoom unstructured. So good for you if you can do that. Good for you. I don't. In my listeners tend to be chatty. So, they'll talk a lot, and I'll have one talk the whole time. Right. And so I've tried doing those Zoom calls as Patreon things, but I don't like it. Like I get nervous and anxious before more than I do when I do the podcast, because I'm in control. So good to hear you're doing that. I just don't.
Well, that sounds like you, like me, are also an introvert, would be how I would guess.
The most hilarious thing at PodFest, right? We would have these set times where we would be at the booth. And so it's me, it's Elsie, it might have been Rob, one of the Robs, but we're there to answer any questions you might have about Libsyn. We'll show off Libsyn 5 and, just talk about anything you want. And it was either, just absolute, just bubbly, like, hey, Libsyn people, what's going on? So good. Yeah, show me Libsyn 5, let's go. Or, so, Kyle or whatever, Biff, do you have a podcast yet? Biff, are you don't have to turn on your camera or your mic. You can just type it in the chat room. So if anybody here, Biff or Susan, or I see Nikki, thanks. Anybody got any question? Not like, I mean, absolute crickets. And so finally one of the marketing people like, hey Dave, why don't you show us Libsyn 5? And I'm like, sure, let's, it's because it seems like podcasting attracts one of two extremes. And it's a great way to meet millions of people without actually meeting millions of people. And I think that's why introverts like it.
Well, maybe. Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
Well, at the very first Podcast Expo, way back in the Podcast and Portable Media Expo in Ontario, California, the very first one in 2005, I drove down for 7-8 hours to get there. Didn't have a ticket because they had sold out by the time that I found that I could go. And so I was just going to go to the parties at night. I went to the first night to the party. I literally walked around for an hour and talked to no one.
Yep.
And I've learned to get better since then, but
Yeah.
I'm by nature an introvert. And
Well,
that
Chris-
is much scarier to me than doing a podcast.
Chris, I don't have the introvert problem. Like I can go into any room and
Okay.
work it, and no, I'm comfortable
I
with
can
that.
now.
I'm super comfortable with that. But for some reason on Zoom or whatever, right, fill in the blank, having 20 faces and no control of who's saying what, like
But you
drives me
do.
nuts. I know
It
you
is-
do. We've set rules, and you can mute people and
Yeah.
raise your hand. Those are all the things that I've gone to, but it feels, I don't know, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
It's
Well-
weird. Like it's weird. I just don't want to do
Yeah.
it. So I need to find a better way to do it.
Yeah.
Clearly, you just need a better class of listener. That's the problem.
Shh, don't tell them that,
Yeah.
Chris.
Craig in the chat room here says, when I get my students together on Zoom, I have a list of questions and conversation starters as a backup.
Yeah.
He says, but I rarely need them. Yeah, Jim, you should try it. You should, and don't invite everybody. Find some people on your newsletter list and just invite 10
Well,
because you'll be amazed. It is really,
no, and I am doing it, Dave, to be honest.
Okay.
So at work at Gallup, where we do this, we have these coaching community calls. And what the way I've gotten around it is I have a speaker who comes for the first 20 minutes. So they come and
Oh,
present
nice.
something, everybody's muted, and then we slowly allow people to kind of come in. And then at the very end, it's open in a free for all, right? Usually by then, everybody's gotten everything out, right? That they kind of need to say and such. So we do it that way. And then I also have done it on the Home Gadget Geek side, where I've invited a guest speaker, but that guest speaker, we had an hour, guest speaker went the whole hour, like didn't stop,
wow.
like started and didn't stop. And I was like, okay, I gotta figure out a better way to do this. So
And I'm going to bow out here because I
Yeah.
have to go be on the last episode of This Week in Travel. I'm actually
Nice.
leaving the show as a co-host here in 2 minutes. So
Chris, before you
nice
go,
to run into you this morning.
how do we find you?
You can find Amateur Traveler wherever fine podcasts are available or at amateurtraveler.com.
There we go.
Thanks for coming
Awesome.
in, Chris.
Thanks
great,
for stopping
great to hear
in.
from you.
And holy cow.
Hey, before we drop,
Yeah.
would you show my screen really quick? I mentioned this studio in Omaha, and I'd love to see others
nice.
do it. It's called Weberized, and just so you know, I'm not making this
Right.
up. Studio time up to 4 people, $30 an hour. So I think pretty reasonable. And then of course they have production packages that are available.
I was gonna
as
say
well.
that's a loss leader. They bring you in at 30 and then it's X amount of money to edit it and things like that, which isn't a bad idea.
Yeah, they're in an incubation in a small, in the startup incubation center here in Omaha that they've, and so their rent is pretty reasonable. They're really trying to get people podcasting. Just to be honest, they see it as like us as a really cool thing, and they're trying to lower the barrier of entry to podcasting.
Nice. Well, Jim, what's coming up on theaverageguy.tv this
Yeah,
week?
Dwayne Robinson is on. Dwayne's works for Microsoft, and we have some great conversation around. Well, this is the one you might want to listen to the pre-show on because we talk about Teslas. So it's pretty great, and the pre-show may be better than the show. That kind of happens sometimes, Dave. Right? That early conversation that you record because you record everything.
Yeah.
So Dwayne is on lots of gadgets and lots of fun. You can join us over at theaverageguy.tv.
Yeah. And if you're listening to us live, we've got another half hour of post show coming up, so don't leave. And on the School of Podcasting this week, I'm talking with Andrea from the Talk About Talk podcast about personal branding and how these little things you can kind of figure out what your strengths are, which I was thinking about Jim every time she said knowing your strengths. I'm like, I know somebody who does a little bit about strengths finders
Just a smidge.
and then working that into your brand. So that'll be coming out Monday on the School of Podcasting. And want to say thanks again to Mark over at podcastbranding.co, James at the Podcast Dog Network, or the Dog Podcast Network. And thanks to everyone in the chat room and all of our awesome supporters. Stick around for some post show.